Hi everyone, this is Lincoln Larson at NC State University, and today I'd like to talk about some work that our partners at NC State and SciStarter have been working on, exploring how multi-project participation among citizen science volunteers benefits both science and society. Many of you tuning in are probably familiar with citizen science and what that is. Essentially, it is scientific work undertaken by members of the general public, often alongside scientists and other groups. And there are many different ways to engage in citizen science, many different frameworks, but this is the general definition that we'll be working from today. And you may have seen many ways in which citizen science can become an important tool for scientific data generation. Even in the recent coronavirus pandemic, we see a number of ways, projects that are being launched to help answer important questions about the virus and how it's transmitted and how it impacts people, all through the lens of citizen science, often in the form of crowdsourced data collection. So that's citizen science in a nutshell. And we know that citizen science is really good with respect to data generation, helping us answer research questions that couldn't be answered in any other way. And this figure from McKinley et al. 2017, the first path, highlights how citizen science can help us acquire science. But it also illustrates a second path, the path that I'd like to focus on a little bit more today, to take a look at how citizen science can produce even broader impacts on not just science, but society as a whole through public engagement, public input in both small-scale and large-scale decision-making processes. So getting beyond the data itself and thinking broadly about the participants and how the public engages with science through citizen science. When you think about broader impacts through that lens, certainly conservation management and policy is something that citizen science can contribute to, but we're also talking about individual learning outcomes, things like science learning, natural resource knowledge, other factors, pro-environmental behavior we'll talk about today, building social capital, agency and capacity to engage in different sorts of activities, public input and community engagement in scientific processes. I mentioned conservation behavior, which is important, cultivating trust between public, scientists, and land managers. So there are all these possibilities out here about what citizen science can achieve. But to what extent are these broader impacts, which are often conceptualized and theorized, to what extent are they actually realized? That is what our research in recent years has been looking at, that particular question, with the focus on different ways of answering it. So, for example, we've been thinking a lot about methods. Do we ask volunteers participating in projects to tell us about the outcomes they experience to self-report, or do we use digital trace data from their interactions with websites, maybe uploading data, that sort of thing? Can we use information along those lines to understand how they're being impacted? With respect to outcomes, what's important? Is it enhancing environmental efficacy and pro-environmental behavior? Is it more about science efficacy? Is it about contributions to policy and decision making? Is it simple knowledge gains we're looking at here? Is it some combination of all of these? So there's lots of possible outcomes, and we'll see a few of these here momentarily, but these are things that we're thinking about. And then, of course, levels of engagement with different projects, and that could mean both the breadth and the depth of engagement within a single project. It could mean to the extent to which people engage across multiple projects and multiple topics, which is where we're going to get later today. All these different combinations. So the icons you see here on this slide relate to various projects that we've been working with, some of the projects we've been working with over the past few years to answer some of these questions. And I'll mention more about a number of these projects as we go on here today. And so what I want to focus on now for the rest of the time is what we've learned so far. First, we have seen that engagement in a single project matters. This should be of no surprise to any of you who've worked in the citizen science space before or read some of the literature indicating that citizen science projects can improve a variety of engagement outcomes for volunteers. Here's an example from one project. This is North Carolina Candid Critters, a wildlife camera trapping project, and what the adults who participated got out of the experience relative to a control group of similar adults who did not deploy cameras as part of the project. And you can see the 0 point in the middle. You can see the treatment group, the blue bars, moving into positive territory post-project for almost every variable. Values did not change, but beliefs about coexistence with wildlife, sense of place, connection to nature, science, efficacy, all these things increased in the treatment group and either showed a decrease or no change in the control group. And so citizen science, particularly with respect to things like connection to nature, science, efficacy, made a big difference for adult volunteers who participated in this project. Looking at kids engaged in the same project, we see similar patterns. Project participation really boosted ecological knowledge, conservation behaviors, uh, beliefs about coexistence with wildlife, interest in science careers, and yes, a control group also increased, but we saw the most pronounced treatment differences for students who came in at lower levels for each of these variables. So students coming in with lower ecological knowledge showed the biggest gains when they were engaged in this citizen science project. And so that shows a lot of potential both for kind of informal education for adults, but also formal education with respect to kids in schools and the role that citizen science projects might play there as well. So certainly engagement in a single project matters, as these results suggest, and many other studies have shown. What about different types of participation? Well, we're finding that no matter how you engage with citizen science, the outcomes might still be positive. So here's an example from a water quality monitoring project that we looked at. And here we considered both the data collectors and the data consumers. So a collector would be somebody out in the field in a kayak, grabbing water samples and uploading data, following protocols. And a data consumer would be somebody affiliated with the project. Perhaps they had an intent at one point to collect water quality samples, but for whatever reason they didn't, but they're still on the listservs and discussion boards and still looking at data reports weekly from the project. So they're part of the process, even if they aren't directly engaging in data collection. And this diagram here kind of indicates on the top path how one group of volunteers might directly acquire the new science, leading to scientific knowledge. But it's also important to consider the lower path where people are there consuming information as part of this larger community and fostering engagement in different ways that can lead to social learning and exchange. That might lead to different types of conservation behavior and ultimately conservation and recreation on the broader scale. What we found in looking at this group was not only did both the data collectors and data consumers say that their participation in the project was associated with generating data to inform management, fostering a sense of community, and improving environmental health and safety. But the people who weren't actually collecting data, the ones who were just part of the community using and viewing it, were more likely to say that kind of their indirect participation led to positive outcomes as well. And we think this is important to consider because so much of the focus in citizen science is on the volunteers, the active volunteers themselves, but there's a bigger community surrounding a lot of these projects, and the impacts might permeate throughout all segments of that community. And that's important to recognize too when you're thinking about how different types of participation matter. Third thing to note, multi-project participation is common. So the first few slides there, I was just talking about single projects and how they matter. What if somebody engages in multiple projects? And how common is that? And so the how common is that part is one of the first things we wanted to look at here. And these figures show Canada critters on the top row, Christmas bird count, one down, and then two ways of looking at the community of volunteers engaged with SciStarter, which is a large platform hosting thousands of citizen science projects around the world. And we looked at digital trace data, so web analytics about participant movements, and also self-reported survey data from that pool of SciStarter volunteers too. And across all these projects, we found that multi-project participation was not just common, it was actually for many of the groups the norm. A majority engage in multiple projects. And you can see the dotted lines here showing the average number of projects people engaged in each of these other pools participated in. And for SciStarter, volunteers, for example, 3 to 4 projects was average, and we had some people in the higher end of 40 or 50, as you can see from the figures here. And even in small projects, which are almost like starter citizen science projects like Candid Critters, the mean trended closer to 2, and there were a lot of people there who were engaging in multiple projects as well. Just another way of looking at the same numbers here. Again, looking at Christmas bird count, the various SciStarter pools, and the single Candid Critters project, you see that multi-project participation was true for a majority of Christmas bird count and SciStarter participants, and a lot of them span multiple topics, not just bird projects, for example, but maybe birds, health, different things. And even for Candid Critters, which again was kind of an entry-level citizen science project, about a third of the sample of that group was still engaging in multiple projects. So again, multi-project participation is very common. When I'm talking about different types of projects here, here's a suite of the possibility of citizen science projects that are out there. A lot of them are ecology and environment projects, and this is based on a typology that Bradley Alf and others have been working on with us. But some of them are health and medicine, some are geology and earth science, some are about pollution or cell and molecular biology or astronomy. There's so many possibilities here, and we have volunteers that are touching all aspects of this network of larger projects. So imagine the possibilities about science literacy and other topics here when you get people that are engaged in this way. And then just to give you a hint of connectivity among projects, we thought, well, maybe they're isolated pockets and people doing environment projects are just doing that. So we did a social network analysis and found this giant hairball, a single cluster of all these projects showing how projects are interconnected. And the take home here is that it doesn't matter what topic your project is focused on. It doesn't matter whether it's online or offline. People are moving across these projects with the fluidity we did not expect. And that speaks to the greater value of multi-project participation in this citizen science space. And this leads to the fourth outcome here. Not just that multi-project participation is common, but it also leads to some of the strongest outcomes we observe. So this is looking at Christmas bird count volunteers, those who only did the CBC, the one bird project. The baseline or the 0 point is people who engage in more than one bird project, but still birds. And then people in that group who did all sorts of different citizen science projects across topics. And what we found in almost all cases is that multiple bird projects perform better on all these outcome variables than single bird projects did. But the best performers with respect to things like conservation behaviors, as you see from the left-hand side, there are various types of behaviors, environmental efficacy, science efficacy, those were the multi-science, multi-topic project participants. And so again, the more you do and the more diverse projects you do, the stronger the outcomes we see associated with some of those efforts. And here's just a snapshot, something we just started looking at really recently. We surveyed a lot of the SciStarter volunteer population. And when you look at some of these outcomes on here, such as enhancing my knowledge of science, improving my ability to understand and interpret science, and then zooming out to societal impacts, help me make an impact on issues that I care about. For example, influence decisions about actions related to science and the environment. In every case, you see a vast majority of respondents saying that participation has helped them do these things. And then the people that are doing multiple projects report even higher levels of accomplishment of these objectives versus those who are just doing a single project. But they're not marked differences there. So we're still trying to tease some of these out. But the point here again is that participation produces significant outcomes, and multi-project participation seems to produce even stronger outcomes. So what does that leave us with so far? Well, number one, engagement in a single citizen science project matters and can lead to multiple positive outcomes. Number two, different types of project participation generate positive outcomes. Number three, multi-project engagement is common, more common than we realized. And number four, multi-project engagement produces some of the strongest outcomes that we have seen. So what does that mean in terms of next steps? Well, we'd like to do more experimental studies like the pre-post stuff I demonstrated earlier to assess causality here. Is it actually the project itself, or is there some other attribute of volunteers that's driving some of these relationships? Be nice to tease that out. It'd be nice to think about how we can operationalize some of these outcome variables like behavior or effective outcomes in different ways. Thinking about embedded assessment to evaluate outcomes. So actually using some of that digital trace data, for example, to see what it means with respect to some of our outcomes of interest. And we're designing some unique citizen science projects now, such as becoming a planet protector, and working with different pools of volunteers to figure out how we might be able to come up with a more creative way of assessing outcomes and building it into the citizen science process. And then finally, evaluating impacts based on breadth and depth of participation, not just within a single project, but across multiple diverse projects. And yes, this can be challenging to do, but we hope that strategies like embedded outcome assessment will help us be able to achieve some of that and really begin to understand the large-scale impacts of citizen science across many projects. So the last thoughts here, the value of volunteer management at the platform level is rising in prominence as we begin to understand how to maximize multiple project outcomes. It's pretty obvious that multi-project engagement is a key part of that. And so platforms like SciStarter.org can play an important role in that process. And I'd like to encourage everybody to embrace this idea of shared management across the bigger community of volunteers. Because if we do that, managers and researchers are going to be better positioned to inspire some of the stewardship, the lifelong learning, and the social change that citizen science is designed to create. And with that, I've got my contact information on here. We're continuing to work on our NSF supported project that's looking into a lot of these dynamic outcomes across the landscape of citizen science. And it would be great if any of you have questions or you want to follow up about some of these topics, please contact me. I'd be happy to talk with you more about this and put you in touch with our team. Thanks for tuning in today, and I look forward to perhaps seeing some of you at the Q&A period for the virtual conference coming up soon. Thank you.